Bienvenidos a lecciones de gramática 15.2 y 15.3, el verbo haber. Today's lesson is kind of a continuation of the last grammar lesson 15.1 over the present perfect tense. Let's talk a little bit about the verb haber, what it means, and how it's used. In the last lesson, you learned that haber can be used to express that someone has done something. This is not to be confused with the verb to have, tener. They have separate uses and they're not interchangeable. You'll recognize these 6 conjugations of the verb haber from the last lesson over the present perfect tense. And so remember these, in these examples, the verb haber is used with the past participle leído coming from the verb leer. So this is saying, I have read, you have read, he or she has read, etc. Another way that we use the verb haber is to just express that something exists. One of the very first words that you learned in the beginning of your Spanish 1 class was the word hay, which means there is or there are, and I can be used in the present tense. Now at the time when you learned that word, you probably didn't realize it came from the verb haber, but as you see this phrase in other tenses, it becomes more obvious that it comes from haber. For example, to say there was or there were in the preterite tense, you say hubo, and in the imperfect tense, you would say había. Now, just a side note, the word hubo is really not very common because more often than not, when you're saying there was or there were, you're setting some kind of a background for your story or your statement or whatever it is you're getting ready to say. And as you know, whenever you're setting the background, you use the imperfect tense. One example when you might use hubo, although this would be pretty rare, is just if you're talking about one isolated incident in the past. So if you wanted to say, for example, there was a cat under the table and it was just this one time, then you could use hubo, but typically you would use había. One other way that we use the verb haber is to express that something is necessary. We use the formula haber plus que plus an infinitive verb to show that there's a need to do something. And this formula is really only used when you don't have a subject. An example would be, you could say, hay que estudiar. There is a need to study. You might say, like there is a need to study or there is a need to clean, those types of things. But it's not necessarily saying that one specific person or group of people needs to do that. Let's talk a little bit about the different conjugations of the verb haber. In the last lesson, you learned how to use haber in the present perfect tense. So these 6 conjugations should look familiar to you. You can also use haber in a tense called the past perfect, and you'll want to write down these 6 conjugations in your notes. The main difference between the present perfect and the past perfect, in the present perfect, you're saying, I have done something. It's just kind of a general statement about yourself. Whereas when you say, yo había hecho algo, I had done something, it insinuates that that's a part of your past, but it's not necessarily part of the present. You'll also want to note the 6 conjugations of the verb haber in the present perfect subjunctive form. For those of you that like to kind of cross-reference and look back in your textbook to kind of clarify some things, it might be helpful for you to know the present perfect is coming from lesson 15.1, the past perfect is lesson 15.2, and the present perfect subjunctive correlates with lesson 15.3. No matter what form of haber you are using when you're conjugating, they're all going to be used with past participles, just like we practiced in lesson 15.1 using the present perfect form of the verb haber with past participles. Let me show you a couple of examples of how you might use each of these in a sentence. We're using the past participle estado, which comes from the verb estar. So estado means been. In the first example, the present perfect tense, I could say, yo he estado feliz. I have been happy. In the past perfect, I would be talking about at some point in my past life, yo había estado feliz. I had been happy. And then with the present perfect subjunctive, remember, using the subjunctive, you have to have two separate clauses. So in your main clause, you're using the regular present tense, ella se alegra, she is glad. Then you use the connector que, meaning that, and then you use the present perfect subjunctive, yo haya estado feliz. So your whole sentence is saying, ella se alegra que yo haya estado feliz. She is glad that I have been happy. Really quickly, I want to give you a couple of reminders about using the verb haber. First of all, whenever you're using haber with the past participles, the past participle will always end in ado or ido. So make sure you're not changing that ending to match your subject like you would if you were using past participles as adjectives. The second reminder that I want to give you is that you will never separate the verb haber and the past participle. Sometimes we do that in English, but you won't in Spanish. Some words that you might be tempted to use to separate the two would be no, which you know means no, or don't or didn't, siempre, always, nunca, which means never, todavía, which can mean still or yet, ya, which means already, and then there's a few more that you might be tempted to do this with. Let's look at some examples of how you might separate the word have and then your past participle in English. You might say, we have always gone to California. We haven't yet eaten our food. We have already cleaned the house. And that's perfectly acceptable in English to separate your verb and then your past participle. However, in Spanish, you won't do that. You'll typically put the past participle, not the past participle, you'll typically put your adverb or whatever this word is at the beginning of your sentence. Look at these examples. The same sentences, I just have put that word at the beginning. So I have always, still, and already at the beginning of the sentence. Siempre hemos ido a California. Always we have gone to California. Todavía no hemos comido nuestra comida. Still we haven't eaten our food. Or ya hemos limpiado la casa. Already we have cleaned the house. You can also take those words and move them to the end of the sentence. So you could say, hemos ido a California siempre. We have gone to California always. Or you can say, no hemos comido nuestra comida todavía. We haven't eaten our food yet. You could also say, hemos limpiado la casa ya. We have cleaned the house already. That wraps it up for today's lesson. Hopefully this makes sense to you and you feel ready to use the verb haber in different contexts. If you have any questions, let me know.